So I've talked about the Fallout 4 world space and the controversial voiced protagonist, but now it's time to talk about something a little more exciting, and that is combat, and also the difficulty settings for this game. The first person shooter gameplay in Fallout 4 is actually pretty good. I think it's an improvement on Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, in fact quite a big improvement. It feels smoother, the guns feel better, the action is a little sharper, and I find it a little easier to play as an FPS style game than the previous titles. There are some nice inclusions such as grenade hotkey and even bash, which was a little unexpected. I didn't expect a quick melee key for Fallout 4, but we got one, and it all works pretty well if you can get past the fact that they put both of those functions on the same key. You do get used to it, but it's an odd thing for a PC player to be forced to have those two functions on the same key. It also required a little messing around with the ini files to get the mouse to work exactly as I wanted. The vertical sensitivity seems very low compared to the horizontal sensitivity, and you've got no control over it. You can fix it with ini file tweaks, but it's odd that they don't allow you to change that in-game. The same is true for mouse acceleration. They don't let you turn that off with an in-game setting. You have to go into the ini files and tweak it. It's not a big deal, but you know, for people who like to set their FPS games up to be, you know, just right, those are the sort of things that would have been nice to have seen in the game without having to do ini tweaks. But honestly, that's really just nitpicking at this point, because overall the FPS gaming just feels really good. I'm actually enjoying that side of the game quite a lot. However, I'm not quite as happy with the VAT system in Fallout 4, which came as a bit of a surprise to me because I was expecting to be impressed with that. Now, for Fallout 3, I really did like the idea of VATs. I used it on my first playthrough, and although I tended to favour the FPS style more than the VAT style, I was always impressed with this idea that they'd come up with to give a feeling of turn-based combat in a first-person game. Because of course when Fallout 3 came out, this was one of the things that a lot of people were worried about. You've turned it into a first-person game, it's supposed to be turn-based. And they managed to add this thing that really, I think, gave you that feeling. You could pause time, pick your target, hit it, and then let the computer calculate whether you hit. So it was just like a turn-based game. I thought it was a really good idea. And when I saw the trailer for Fallout 4, I was really impressed with the fact that the VATs had been changed to not stop time, but to slow it down. It looked more exciting. But once I started using it, I kinda went off that. First of all, it's a little fiddly to use because the limbs move and sometimes are sort of hidden by one limb for a brief second. It can be a little fiddly to get your target on the right area, especially if you use the mouse. I tend to prefer the mouse, and it was almost easier with the keyboard. And even then, it just felt a little clumsy. And so I would sometimes feel almost more rushed in VATs than if I was doing the FPS game, which was an odd thing. On this issue, I don't really blame them for experimenting, but I wouldn't be too surprised to find that someone will make a mod that actually slows down time completely, totally and utterly stops it, so that it goes back to the old VATs feel, and that will probably be quite a popular mod, just purely because it will reduce the fiddliness of trying to click on the right thing while it's moving. However, probably my biggest complaint with VATs is not actually about VATs, but the fact that the game seems to be trying to force me to use VATs. I'd intended to test VATs out on my first playthrough anyway, but probably slowly fade it out and just use it occasionally. However, it would seem that the only way to build up criticals is to do so in VATs, and I do not like that at all. Don't get me wrong, I love the idea of building the critical up and then having control over when it fires. I just don't like the idea that I have to do it from VATs. I think you should be able to build up your critical in normal combat, and then once it's full, activate the critical either in first person or, you know what, I don't even mind going into VATS just to fire the critical off. But forcing us to go into VATS to do it is a little annoying. That's kind of the reason I go into VATS now. I enter combat, and if I don't have a critical ready, I start using VATS to build up the critical until it's full, and then I keep the critical for those special moments. I don't use it because it's such a pain in the backside to build up, having to use VATS. I would just like to be able to build it up outside of VATS and then use it at will. Now, I'm pretty sure that will be a mod, but it's just one of those things. It's one of those little annoyances. Now, again, this is probably something that won't hit everybody. A lot of people will probably use VATS, but if you're the sort of person who prefers the FPS style combat, you probably know exactly what I mean. If you don't use VATS to build up your critical, you're kind of losing out on a big part of the look special. But overall, taken as a whole, the combat mechanics are pretty good. I think it's a step forward from Fallout 3, and I'm generally pretty impressed. I was a little less impressed with the difficulty settings and the way Bethesda had chosen to provide us a challenge in combat, which, let's face it, is to make all of the enemies a bullet sponge so that it takes half an hour to kill them no matter how many times you shoot them in the face with a shotgun. It's definitely not the most innovative of all ways of providing difficulty. In fact, let's face it, it's pretty damned lazy. But it wasn't a massive surprise because this is what Bethesda games normally end up giving us. Don't get me wrong, the fights can be tough when you start the game and can be kind of fun, although a little arcade-ish because of the bullet sponge nature. But you do find after a while, as you approach the mid-game, you begin to drop your enemies pretty damned quickly anyway, and so this difficulty method begins to fail a little. The fights are less of a challenge because it's relying on the bullet sponge nature. Once you have overcome the bullet sponge nature, and you will if you upgrade your perks and you upgrade your weapons, the game does begin to lose some of its challenge. Compare this to games such as The Witcher 3, which, if you play on the hardest difficulty, will still cause you these sort of worrying moments even when you are faced with very low-level opponents. If you have not done your homework, if you're not prepared, or if they just catch you by surprise and you're not concentrating, you can actually have a very, very bad fight with some fairly weak opponents. And so whilst you're always getting more and more powerful, and you will eventually feel a lot more powerful than the people you face, you are still constantly being challenged to some degree. Now, Fallout 4 was also a little conspicuous because of the absence of the hardcore mode, something we had in Fallout New Vegas. Hardcore mode actually made the game more difficult and more brutal by changing things like the way you healed broken limbs, the effectiveness of stim packs, the amount of ammo you found, all of these little things. And it was actually a very, very cool mode. It was something I really, really did enjoy. The only thing we had even remotely like this in Fallout 4 was survival mode's reduction of stim pack healing rate. Basically, when you stuck a stim pack in you didn't get the health back in a couple of seconds. It took quite a long time for you to regenerate this health. It made you completely change the way you had to fight. You couldn't just spam a few stim packs and survive a really, really bad fight and carry on fighting. You would probably have to run and hide and take the stim packs and hopefully over the next minute or so get back into the fight. It really is something that changes the way you play, and in fact for me was one of the biggest reasons to play survival mode in Fallout 4. I have no idea why they didn't actually add a hardcore mode, to be honest, and I'm not even sure why they didn't take a few cues from Fallout 3 mods such as Fallout Wanderers Edition or the Fallout New Vegas mod, Project Nevada, for little things they could do to make the game a lot more challenging. Equally confusing was one of the things they added to the game to make it more challenging, and that was the legendary enemy concept. They basically added these super buffed versions of pretty much every creature that you essentially just buffed all their stats, all the damage they do, all the damage they could take, and then make it so they drop a legendary item, which is a super buffed, somewhat silly, and often overpowered version of an existing item. It's a way of adding more challenging fights, more, I wouldn't know what you'd call it, varied types of enemies, but it's an exceptionally lazy way, in my opinion. If you want to see a good example of how to add lots of new bad guys to fight, check out the Fallout 3 mod, Mart's Mutant mod, which adds a lot of different variations of existing creatures. Raiders who are bigger than other raiders, ghouls that are much larger or much fiercer and have distinctive physical characteristics. Super mutants that look very, very different are so much bigger and have special abilities. It's just all round a great mod for adding a massive variety to the enemies you will be facing, and it's infinitely more interesting than just sticking the word legendary on the front of absolutely everything. A legendary rad roach is really not that interesting. It really isn't. Give me some raiders who are 7 foot tall and massive muscle-bound freaks who can knock you over with a single punch. Give me a 2-headed super mutant. Give me something different. Give me mutated humans. Why not? Why not a human with some odd mutation, something grown out of his back, something weird? Come up with something different, something interesting, as well as tough. Just sticking the word legendary in front of everything and then adding these randomized drops with a star after them. It's just, well, it's the sort of thing you expect in Borderlands 2, and it might work in that type of a game. It's a very arcadish FPS game, but in something like Fallout 4, I want to feel like the enemies I am fighting have had some love and attention. Thank you very much. If I'm fighting a boss, I want him to have a name. If I'm fighting an extremely tough creature, I want him to be spectacular. You know, when you fight one of the massive giant super mutants, the behemoth, I can never say that right. Those creatures, you feel like you've achieved something because it's a massive, enormous version of the original. It just doesn't feel the same to beat a legendary mole rat. Sorry, but no. It seems like a very lazy way to add a challenge, to add the feeling of content. But more importantly to me, it feels really quite, well, out of place in a Fallout world. It feels like it belongs in Borderlands 2, a game that I loved. I played this 15 times through, for God's sake. I love that game, and that feature there, the ultimate badass raiders with their legendary loot drops. It works, but that's a completely different game to Fallout 4, so not only does it feel lazy, it just feels a little out of place. In the end, a very mixed verdict from me regarding combat and difficulty. I would say it is a slight improvement over Fallout 3 and New Vegas in some respects, and pretty much no better, and in some ways worse than the combat and difficulty in Fallout New Vegas. It certainly is not as good for me, for my personal tastes, as, say, a heavily modded Fallout New Vegas game. And of course, I am looking forward to some massive combat and difficulty overhaul mod, a kind of Fallout Wanderers edition, or a Project Boston, or whatever it's going to be, for Fallout 4. In fact, I will say now, I don't think I will do a second playthrough until such a mod is out and mature enough to use on a full playthrough. That is how strongly I feel regarding this. My current playthrough will probably last for quite some time, but a second playthrough, I'm going to want a more hardcore experience. So that is it for this video on my thoughts regarding the combat and difficulty for Fallout 4. In the next video, I'm going to tackle another controversial subject, the character build, the character system, how you grow in strength, perks, specials, and skills, or specifically the lack thereof of skills. An issue that caused many a raised eyebrow when we first realized it. and that's what I'm going to talk about next time. So if you're interested in that, you are more than welcome to join me.